Welcome to our class. In this video, I would like to talk about the PHP session variable. Every server technology has what is called a session, which enables us to store information as we go from page to page. So I would like to demonstrate with lynda.com. I have logged in and you can see that they know I'm here. As I travel throughout this site, choosing videos to watch, it will know that I am logged in because it is transferring the fact that I am logged in a session variable. If I were to copy this URL and paste it into a different browser, it would no longer know that I'm logged in. I have to now sign in. Session variables only are good for the browser that you are in. They are not stored on your computer. The information contained in the session is stored on the server. There may be a session ID that is stored on your computer as a cookie, which will disappear when you close the browser. So let's take a look. I am on localhost, and in my folder, I have several files that have to do with a login scenario. So what we're going to do, we're going to log in to some pages that are accessible only for members, meaning if you have successfully logged in, meaning you have an account. For our purposes, you can use any username and password. The session will use your username to track you throughout the different pages. Before we proceed, I would like to just show you. If you were to click on one of the pages, or even the login page, without logging in, you will get an error message here. Please go back and enter a valid password. Here's page 2. You must be logged in. Please go back and enter a valid password. Here's page 3. Please go back and enter a valid password. You must be logged in. Alright, so when I log in, and as I said, any login and password will work, we have set the session variable. I have logged in. This is my session ID, and we will look at the code shortly. It's telling me I am logged in as Pelkie, that's my name. The session variable is essentially an associative array, very similar to $_post, and it holds all of the key value pairs. So we have set the session called logged in, that's the name of the variable, and the value is Pelkie. I have also set a timeout. I've set it to 1 minute, so I have to hurry up here. This is the time from the date object. As I go on to page 2, and I just carried over my session number to show you, I'm logged in as Pelkie. Here again, here's the information in my session array. Now I'm going to add something similar to what you might see in a shopping cart. And here we are with my preference being stored in a session set to the value that I have chosen. So should I go back to page 2 because I am on page 3, that information will carry. So this is one way that we can track information from page to page and also add to information as we travel. If you have ever added items to a shopping cart, that's what essentially you're doing. You're putting those values in and you're keeping them as you travel throughout the store. When it comes time to check out, many times you fill out the form on several different pages. On page 1, you may fill out your billing address. On page 2, you might fill out your shipping address. However, it carries all of this data. Ultimately, this data will be put into a database. However, we are not going to access that database We are not going to make that database connection until we have all of the data that will be put into it. So it is very common to be using a session to collect the data to make sure that the user hasn't decided to cancel out before we actually put it into the database. Ultimately, when the user decides to, yes, I'm going to buy all this stuff, or yes, sign me up, then the information goes into the database. Now, I've been sitting here talking, and I am on page 2. Should I click to page 3, you notice my session has timed out. And I did this rather than automatically redirecting you, just so that you can see it in writing. And now I need to go back and log in again. So let's take a look at the code. My login.html is just a plain HTML document. And I have a form, the name equals user, and the name equals PW. My action is login.php. So I will be sending 2 values to this login page. The first thing you need to do to work with sessions is you need to start the session. And this line of code needs to go first before any other code in the page. And it needs to be on every page, regardless of where you start. Now, this is how you retrieve the session ID. Here again, it's not really necessary unless you wanted to use that to track the user. I'm just showing you that there is a session ID, and I am storing it in this variable. This is actually the name that is used by the php.ini file. Now, first we're determining if they sent a login and password. In a realistic situation, you would be checking if it is a valid login and password, probably with values in the database. So here we have our if determining if one of these fields is empty. So as long as there's something in them, what we're doing, we are setting our session variable. So the $_session, which is the global variable, and whatever key we give it, and the key we're using is the word logged in. And I am setting that to the value that is coming from the $_post, the value of user. And in our situation, it was Pelkie. Now, I could have put this in another variable, but I'm leaving it that way so you can identify it in the code that comes down later. This is where I'm setting the timeout. Here again, you don't necessarily have to time out your sessions. However, it's a good idea. Most applications such as email, Blackboard, etc. do time out after a certain period. So here we're using time. This is the check to see if we've timed out. This is the exact time that I logged in. I'm setting this to 1 minute, 1 times 60, which is 1 minute, 60 seconds. You actually need to work with seconds, but the reason I did it this way is if you, say, wanted to make it 30 minutes, all you would do is change that. And we're seeing if it's less than time. So we're looking here. And where is time going to come from? It's going to interpret it. At that point, whatever the value of time is, we are setting it here to what the time was when we logged in. And this represents what the time was when we logged in, adding this amount of time. And we're saying if this is less than the current time, so you can figure out how much time you want to elapse. And if this is true, we execute this echo, which gives the user the message they've timed out and gives them the link to go back. All right, else everything is fine. You don't need an else here. All right, now, there's 2 parts to this. The first is if one of these is empty. And if they're not empty, then we execute all this. But if it is, then we need to give them an error message, tell them to go back and log in. In the body, here's my echo statements. Remember, we stored the session ID in this variable. you are logged in as, and here again I said we could have substituted this for a variable. I left it so you could see the session. $_session is a global server variable. It is an associative array essentially, and this is the value of the key, and it holds the value assigned to it, which was my name. The print _r, like I said, $_session is an associative array, allows us to see everything. This is wonderful for testing purposes. And here's basic HTML. Page 2. So session _start has to be inside every document. Now we're going to determine if they're logged in or not. And this is to prevent someone from accessing that page if they're not logged in, similar to the lynda.com example. If they're not logged in, then we're going to give them this message. You must be logged in. However, this is not an echo, this is an exit. So what this is doing, it is exiting out of the script and then just giving them this message so that they would log back in. If is set logged in. Remember, this is the variable, the session variable we set in the very beginning. And if that is set, if it has a value, we know that they logged in and we know that the session was established. And therefore, we're going to execute all this code. So the code that we're going to execute here, we're going to check that time again. So this routine here is predominantly to make sure they're logged in. So you would need this on every page, checking to make sure they're still logged in order to view this page. So this is similar to what's called a password protected page. And this is how we check whether they've logged in with the login and password. We set a session because that session will carry from page to page. And if you look in the HTML code, it's very similar. Here we have our ID we're echoing. You are logged in as, this will give us the value. Here we have the print R. Page 3 is essentially the same. You always need the session _start. If I want to carry that ID, I need a variable for it. Here we're checking to make sure they're logged in, because if they're not, then we're going to exit out of here and give them that error message. If they are logged in, the first thing we're doing, we're checking the timeout. The second thing we're doing, remember on page 2 we submitted that form. So here we're establishing a new session variable for that form value. Here is if is set $_post submit, because they didn't have to click that button. We're only going to set this session if the user clicked the submit button. And we're looking at is set $_post submit because I have a value in there and a name. So this is the determination if they clicked that button. And if they did, then we're going to set the session variable, and it's going to be equal to whatever they chose in the drop-down list here. So here our code is similar again. We're echoing out the ID. We're echoing out the value of the name they logged in. Now here we have an if. If is set the preference, because they didn't have to do that. So only if they did set that, we will tell them what their preference is. And here's our print R. One more thing that I forgot to show you, so we'll log back in again. I'll log in as YYYY, is we have the logout button. At any point, the user has the choice of logging out and terminating the session. So let's take a look at this code. So all we're doing in that HTML is calling logout.php. Here again, we need a session start. And we have two more functions. Session _unset essentially removes all the name value pairs, and then we destroy the session. Technically, you could just destroy the session. However, it's not a bad idea to unset the values anyway, just to be on the safe side. Now, you could have redirected, you could have exited out and just redirected to the user to another page. I just have that code commented for your information. However, I didn't do it that way because I wanted to actually see that we have logged out. So here we have the HTML and just a hyperlink if they want to go back and log in.